The Certainty Principle by David Light, Chapter 9, Sections 1 and 2. Chapter 9, O is for Outcomes. Surrender by Outcomes. You really don't think about, quote, you really don't think about the outcome because you really have no control over it. You concentrate on what you are doing to do the best job you can, unquote. General Chuck Yeager on Achievement, 1991. When Chuck Yeager beat the sound barrier in October 1947, he was focusing on doing his job, not the outcome. Such important, even dangerous achievements take courage and focus because there's little room for outcome obsession out there on the razor's edge of the possible. Quote, up there on the mountain, we want to find long, hard days, days when we don't know in the morning what the evening will bring. It's time we searched again for the limits of possibility. For we must have such limits if we're going to use the virtue of courage to approach them. Where else will we be able to find refuge in our flight from the oppression of everyday humdrum routine? Unquote, Reinhold Messner, 1971. This is translated from the German, so work with it. But he basically says, courage is in really not caring about what's ahead and just doing what you need to do. And that's the way to excitement. That's the way to an interesting life. That's the way to avoid boredom, so to speak. Great quote. Reinhold Messner, the most accomplished alpinist of all time, is consumed by his courage to confront the impossible. Certainty is courageous confidence, which decreases with my vigilance of my addiction to outcomes over action. To achieve, I must separate the control of my decision-making from the conditional and therefore uncertain outcomes they invariably produce. Quote, I am the ship, not the wake, unquote, is a good metaphor for this awareness. Plans dictated by my goals are as necessary as a compass, but outcomes, the wake, are not my actions, the ship. They are physically different. To the extent that I am enthralled with outcomes, I will consistently fail. To the extent that I am enthralled with my deliberate pathfinding actions, achievement is assured because control of my actions is absolute. So if you look at it that way, like success is really infinite control of your actions and attention to their excellence. The bearing of the ship is a measure of the ideal compass direction with respect to a distant target. However, course corrections are always required along the way, as warranted by weather and currents. On occasion, this can mean changing the target itself as conditions either prevent reaching the destination or indicate a more favorable destination. Similarly, goals and objectives require learning along the way that inform our next action steps. If a step fails, back up and try a different action step. If I make the outcome of each step on the path my priority, I'm bound for disappointment because there are a myriad of unforeseen obstacles intermediate to my goal getting. Certainty is doing what I must do, independent of outcome. Optimally, I am the doing, not the done. I am a verb, not a noun. Therefore, I am only limited by my enthrallment with the expected or resulting outcomes of my actions. This goes back to like the uncertainty to Heisenberg, right? I can only measure one thing or the other, so choose the thing. Identity through outcomes is the brain seeking emotional gratification through the way things happen to turn out. The trouble is, the outcome of each of my actions, in some degree or another, is subject to conditions beyond my control. I know Mr. Yeager and Messner for their extraordinary achievement, i.e. the great outcomes they delivered after years of hard work, but I typically give little thought to the myriad of poor outcomes they encountered along the path to their achievements. Setbacks didn't stop them because their commitment to doing the best job was paramount. The outcome was just the data provided that proved or disproved a particular approach or technique. Their success resulted from focusing on the quality of their work and ignoring the outcomes, except for the data it provided. Certainty comes to the degree to which I learn to detach myself from the outcome of my actions. This is not the same as acting without considering probable outcomes. That's irresponsibility. It is the deliberate taking of an action without attaching oneself to the result, because the result is a combination of my decision and conditions, those independent variables beyond my control. I maintain my car so it will take me where I want to go, safely and without a breakdown. But a random nail on the road can still result in a flat tire, even though I did my best to avoid such a failure. But how many times have I allowed my self-confidence to be broken by circumstances beyond my control? Not a good thing. It's better to build a Teflon ego, man. Nothing sticks. A dear friend of mine developed brain cancer. It so happens that I know a few medical professionals in the field, so I decided to make it my personal goal to identify the best programs for treating his specific type of cancer, and to help him to assess and access these treatments. I investigated the options and helped him develop a plan of action. What I failed to seriously consider at the time was that the outcomes for brain cancer are statistically grim. Enlisting myself in the effort, my identification with a positive outcome became so compelling that when he finally succumbed to the disease, I was shaken to the point of denial. My goal had been fixed on a cure for his cancer, rather than the more vital one of demonstrating my love and loyalty. To this day, nearly a year later, now 3 years later, I still find it difficult to accept that he died after my enthrallment with curing him. The story exposes a rather obvious failure of reasoning on my part, a systematic vulnerability based on hope over reason. It also reveals the powerful forces at work in my brain that instinctively seek identification with unreasonably biased outcomes. Not good. An interesting trick here is when you endeavor on something that you feel is the right thing, calculate a probability of success, just like in your head. How do you think things might turn out, or most probably will turn out? While the brain's identification with outcomes delivers disappointment to its victims, it can be monetized by those who have learned to exploit this vulnerability. 9.1 Exploiting Hope and Despair. Spectatorship, Media, and Religion. More mundane examples of my brain seeking acknowledgement by attaching to outcomes are unrelenting. Celebrities purposefully leverage the public's fascination with the events in their lives, knowing its foolish distraction delivers them dollars. Religion leverages the notion of original sin, past outcomes, and the promise of redemption and heaven, future outcomes, to enlist followers and command their support. I go to a football game enthralled with the success of my team, regardless of the odds, to escape my own laziness and lack of initiative. After all, only have so many minutes on the planet, only so much amount of energy to apply to the completion and fulfillment of our own mandates. I watch popular TV news mesmerized by the tragic outcomes of others, in an effort to mitigate the guilt from my own lack of achievement. Enthrallment with outcomes perpetuates the spectator brainset. Spectatorship replaces focus on what I directly control with indirect and conditional hope and despair of others. The business of spectatorship and viewership exploits this brain vulnerability. Regardless of the venue, spectator events of all kinds leverage my brain's emotional enthrallment with outcomes beyond my control. Despite the reality that my observations have little impact on the outcome of a football match, my emotional enthrallment is compelling. Even if I'm only watching it on TV as a spectator, my identity investment in its outcomes are its own reward. Win, lose, or draw, my identity is enhanced through attachment to the outcomes of these million-dollar players. In a sense, I am paying a price to accept the experience of loss because the abstract loss is an experience that prevents me from fully confronting my own failures. After all, if the Eagles can lose, how bad can it be if I screw up? To be certain, I must, over and over, confront failure and fix it. I must want to win and be willing to passionately fight through hell and high water to win for my own account. This is much different than having a passion for those fighting eagles. Spectatorship is a harmlessly entertaining, even symbiotic delusion as long as I'm aware of the delusion. Unaware spectatorship becomes a thin proxy for real life. I defer the desperation of my inaction by experiencing vicariously the actions of others. Philadelphia Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie watches every game, but he is not a spectator. Such makers and creators understand that the opiate of spectatorship makes them lots of money. Conversely, being a devoted fan emasculates individual accountability, an outcome for which millions willingly pay billions. The Emperor Nero knew how to emasculate his citizenry. In 64 AD, nearly 70% of Rome was burned to the ground. Accusations that Nero's megalomania was to blame for the fire triggered a vicious backlash by the emperor. He foiled his opponents with a propaganda campaign, attributing the disaster to those rabble-rousing Christians, then initiating a brutal spectacle of public persecution in the Colosseum. His plan worked. The people of Rome were sufficiently placated by the sadistic amusements that the tyrant remained in power an additional 4 years before finally killing himself. Probably good news to the people. Why was the revolt against him quelled by such a ruthless display of power? Why were regular public spectacles of torture perpetuated as a device of political control for the next 200 years? Question mark. If this sounds familiar, we're doing this in spades today. The political establishment uses the power of spectacle and news and media to manipulate us like crazy. Hooliganism, violent and disorderly behavior spawned at or after sporting events, is a well-studied aspect of spectatorship. Sports studies scholars Paul Gow and Joel Rockwood at Liverpool Hope University found in a 2008 study that, quote, involvement in football violence can be explained in relation to a number of factors relating to interaction, identity, legitimacy, and power. Football violence is also thought to reflect the expressions of strong emotional ties to the football team, which may help to reinforce a supporter's sense of identity. Why does that sound familiar? Intense identification with external events can permit an individual, albeit temporarily, to abandon the internal accountability that anchors their behavior to reality. The brain of the pathological spectator is fundamentally hijacked by the promise of a synthetic spike in identity via dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, other neurotransmitters, through association with the celebrity of the overall event. Hence, professional sports are often characterized as a religion in popular media, with all the trappings, chants, songs, logoed clothing, all help perpetuate the effect of an identity boost through external association. But when my team fails, my identity fails also. Such are the pitfalls of identification with externals. Spectators' focus on outcomes represents the brain's addiction to identity wherever it can be found, even if it needs to be bought or borrowed from another for the price of an admission ticket. Just observe the post-game faces of fans of a losing team compared to the faces of the players. The fans are often crestfallen, depressed, even violent. Players sadly march back to their locker room only to smile as they collect the millions the fans are paying them for the vicarious emotional roller coaster called spectatorship. Spare me the time, effort, and money. My individual ideas, challenges, decisions, performance are paramount, and optimizing them requires resources. The courage and tenacity to act on my individual mandate will prove to be exciting enough. TCP shows how my deference to distractions limits my achievement. To win at my mandate, the behaviors of others, regardless of their celebrity, must be rendered for whatever valuable data it holds. Further, those behaviors must be ignored as mere background noise. I become my own spectator, being careful to remain aligned with my own priorities, focused on the quality and character of my own actions.